2023 is showing no signs of slowing down, and the next major AAA megaton is already right around the corner. In 2019, EA delivered one of the best Star Wars games in years with Jedi Fallen Order, and with its upcoming sequel, Jedi Survivor, the studio seems primed to improve upon its first outing in this galaxy far, far away in nearly every way imaginable. Ahead of its looming launch, here we'll be looking at some of the key details that you should know about it. Story details. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is going to pick up 5 years after the events of its predecessor. In the Star Wars timeline, that means it takes place roughly 9 years before the events of A New Hope, and at about the same time as last year's Disney Plus miniseries Obi-Wan Kenobi. By now, Cal is, of course, a full-fledged Jedi Knight, and accompanied by BD-1, he's trying to stay one step ahead of the Galactic Republic and their incessant hunt of any and all remaining Jedi, though Cal and BD-1 won't be in the company of the Stinger Mantis' crew when the game kicks off. Familiar characters like Merrin, Grease are going to return, though exactly what role each of them will play remains to be seen. Darker tone. The sequel being a darker story than the original is a pattern as old as time, and one that Star Wars in particular has been no stranger to over the years. Unsurprisingly, Jedi Survivor will go down that path as well, and will tell a story that's much darker in tone than Fallen Order. Speaking in an interview with Game Informer, actor Cameron Monaghan, who portrays Cal Kestis, said, quote, "We have a really interesting story with Cal where he's faced with challenges that are difficult, and there's not necessarily any right answers. It's something that I always really wanted to explore with the character. It was a conversation that we had immediately after the first game. How do we put this character in situations that are challenging? And what are the ones that are really going to push him to the point where he might break? How do we get him to that point, and what do we do from there? What is the story that will be the most exciting, where we can still find adventure, but also find something that is deeper and darker and more intricate and complex?" So yeah, I think that we have a bunch of really big questions that we're asking with this one. End quote. Bode Akuna. While Jedi Survivor will be bringing back several characters that players will be familiar with, it'll also introduce newcomers to the story. One in particular that the developer has spoken a bit about is Bode Akuna, a mercenary who has a close friendship with Cal. According to the developer, he and Cal are almost like brothers and have a special bond. What role he will play in the story remains to be seen, but it has been confirmed that in some parts of the game, he'll accompany Cal as an AI companion. Merrin. Merrin, one of the few surviving Night Sisters, was one of the best characters in Fallen Order, and it seems like she's going to have an ever larger role to play in Jedi Survivor. Again, details are a little scant on the narrative front, but in the brief glimpses that we've seen of it so far, she seems to have a new look, which makes sense given the fact that 5 years have passed since the first game. Like Bode Akuna, Merrin too will serve as an AI companion in some sections of the game, and will be helping Cal out in combat with some pretty flashy moves. Combat stances. Star Wars Jedi Survivor is looking to make plenty of improvements over its predecessor on the gameplay front in particular, and where combat is concerned, one of the biggest improvements it's making is with the inclusion of 5 combat stances, each of which will have unique strengths and attributes. For starters, there's the single blade stance, which is your starter stance, and will function the way you would expect. The double-bladed stance is slower and has shorter range, but it deals more damage, and is effective for crowd control. The crossguard stance is even slower and has even shorter range, but it deals the most damage and allows you to wield a lightsaber that comes with a crossguard atop its hilt. Similar to Kylo Ren's saber, the twin blade stance allows you to deal much greater damage at greater speed, but makes you more impervious to damage, putting greater emphasis on the necessity of dodges and blocks. Finally, the blaster stance will let you equip a lightsaber and a blaster at the same time, and will be more effective for longer range combat with some limitations. The game won't suddenly turn into a shooter. Enemy types. An expanded roster of enemy types is another area where Star Wars Jedi Survivor is looking to crank things up a notch over its predecessor with its combat. We're obviously going to have to wait and play the game ourselves to know just how expanded it is, but several of the game's many enemy types have already been revealed and detailed. For instance, players can expect plenty of separatist droids from the prequel trilogy, including the likes of B-1 battle droids, B-2 droids, BX droids, IG-100 Magna Guard, and more. Force abilities. Using Force abilities is a crucial part of the combat, and now that Cal is a fully fledged and experienced Jedi, he's going to have plenty more of those in his arsenal as well. From what we've seen in the game's trailers so far, Cal can now use the Force to pick up enemies and slam them into the ground, and even use them as shields against oncoming fire. Another new ability that has been showcased is a bubble of sorts that slows down time around him, allowing him to maneuver around frozen enemies and dispatch them with greater ease. Traversal improvements. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order put plenty of emphasis on traversal and movement abilities, and Jedi Survivor is seemingly going to step things up in this area as well. The biggest and most prominent change we've seen so far is the inclusion of an Ascension Cable, which is essentially a grappling hook that Cal can use to pull himself towards distant things in the environment. He also has a new dash ability thanks to his upgraded Force powers, while it looks like AI companions will also come with unique traversal options. Meanwhile, Cal will now also be able to tame creatures he finds in the world and use them as mounts to get around maps more quickly. So far, we've seen both grounded and aerial mounts, but it remains to be seen just how much variety we can expect from mounts throughout the entire game. Jedi Meditation Chambers. Jedi Meditation Chambers will be another major gameplay addition in Jedi Survivor for fans to look forward to. These will essentially be optional activities and will serve a lot like shrines in the Breath of the Wild. The focus here will be purely on solving puzzles using your Force abilities and traversal options, the reward for which will be perks that will provide unique combat bonuses. Force Tears and Cosmetics. Along with Jedi Chambers, Cal can also discover Force Tears. These transport him to a different place and offer platforming challenges. Completing these grant skill points, but you may have to go out of your way to find them. Finally, we get a better look at the cosmetics for BD1 and Cal. The former can equip different heads and frames, while the latter has an assortment of outfits, facial hair, hairstyles, and more to unlock. The customization is greatly expanded over the original and looks good. Fallen Order abilities from the start. It's important to note that Cal isn't starting from zero. You won't have to worry about losing any powers from Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order and having to relearn them. Speaking to Games Radar, the design director said, quote, "We knew we wanted his skills to continue in Survivor, and that was one of the challenges. Tweaking enemies to handle his new powers from the beginning was crucial. We don't want to take away those moves because they feel good. You can't go backwards and feel like a Padawan. It has to feel like the power level is the same, but also you have to reach another level." End quote. PS5 DualSense features. On PS5, it will leverage the DualSense to give you that feeling of being one with the Force. Speaking to PlayStation Blog, the developer said, quote, "With the PS5, we're really digging the haptics and what the controller is bringing, and it's been a lot of fun to see how that works with push and pull, Force powers, and a DualSense controller. It feels really good, and we're taking advantage of that. You're going to feel it on the triggers when you're doing push and pull. If you really push on the triggers, it's going to give a different response, compared to if you're lightly feathering them. And the game is going to react to that. It's the nuance within the vibrations on the controller which is pretty outstanding. Our audio team and our combat team are really dialed into how the things that are happening in the world, the effects, and everything that are like translating to how it feels in your hands." End quote. Expanded cosmetic customization. Cosmetic customization was a bit lacking in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, with the game never really managing to make its options for Cal's ponchos and his lightsaber hilts feel compelling in any real way. Its sequel is looking to step things up in this front, with cosmetic options now coming in the form of entire costumes that will change Cal's look from head to toe. How expansive these options will be and how much variety they will provide remains to be seen, but it certainly seems like a step in the right direction. Additional gameplay improvements. In addition to some of the major gameplay changes and improvements that Jedi Survivor will introduce, many of which we've spoken of here, it will also be making some more granular improvements, though not insignificant by any means. It looks like human dismemberment is also in now, so you can expect to see some limbs getting chopped off when you slice foes with lightsabers. Larger, denser, more detailed maps. Unlike most major AAA games releasing these days, Star Wars Jedi Survivor is going to be a current-gen exclusive, and the fact that the developer hasn't had to build the game around the outdated and significantly less powerful hardware of the PS4 and Xbox One will reflect in the game's level design as well, according to the developer. Players can expect much larger maps with greater density and more detail. In an interview with Play Magazine, they said, quote, "You'll experience the benefit of the more powerful hardware throughout Survivor. Bottom line, we learned quickly that we could take advantage of the faster processors. Larger, faster memory, better loading times, etc. to create much larger maps with more detail, greater density, broader enemy NPC variety, and overall fidelity. These features aligned perfectly with how we wanted to push the game. We didn't want to break what we did in the first game because it was well received, but we wanted to evolve or enhance the experience. This new generation allowed us to do exactly that, and I believe it translates to a true new-gen experience in the Star Wars universe." Tech improvements. As you would expect, it's not just level design and density that will benefit from Star Wars Jedi Survivor being a current-gen exclusive. The game will feature plenty of technical improvements over its predecessor as well. Thanks to the SSDs of the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S, the game will feature significantly shorter load times, but probably the biggest of these improvements will come in the form of real-time ray tracing and drastically upgraded lighting. Quote, "I think the biggest thing is ray tracing or lighting," the developer said at the time of the game's announcement last year. "That's allowing us to do real-time lighting all the time, at a fidelity that's well beyond anything that we've ever produced before. Since it's real-time, we get to see the changes as we tweak the lights, immediately, essentially. That means that we have more time to polish. That means that we can iterate more, and we can get better results that feel more filmic." End quote. BD1's Binocular Mode. In a recent interview with WCCF Tech, design director confirmed that Jedi Survivor will allow players to use BD1's new Binocular Mode that will let you place beacons on points of interest in the world. Similar to how placing markers functions in something like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, these beacons will then be visible on your map as well, in addition to being visible when using BD1's Binocular Mode. One of the new features is BD1's Binocular Mode, they said. Quote, "With that you can put a point in the world through the binoculars or through the map and they'll talk to each other. So if you put a beacon through the binoculars, they'll show up in the map and vice versa." End quote. PC requirements. Given the technical leaps that Jedi Survivor is making, it goes without saying that it's going to require much more powerful hardware for players to be able to play it, and sure enough, that is reflected in the game's PC requirements as well. Minimum requirements are relatively less demanding, though on the lowest specs, the game will require either an Intel Core i7-7700 or a Ryzen 5 1400, along with either a GTX 1070 or a Radeon RX 580 with 8GB of VRAM and 8GB of RAM. Meanwhile, on recommended settings, you'll need either an Intel Core i5 11600K or a Ryzen 5 5600X, along with either an RTX 2070 or an RX 6700 XT with 8GB of VRAM and 16GB of RAM. On either setting, you'll need a whopping 155 gigs of free storage space. And that brings us to the end of the video. A quick request: we upload new videos every single day, and if you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing. It really helps us out. Also, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon so that you can receive daily video updates. Thanks for watching.